The reason why Sudan split into two. Hello Displorers, welcome back to another informative video and thanks for watching. In this video we shall be taking a deep dive into the real reasons why Sudan split to form two separate sovereign countries, the Republic of Sudan and the Republic of South Sudan. But before we proceed, if you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. Upon gaining independence from Britain on January 1, 1956, Sudan was the largest country in Africa by surface area with more than 2.5 million square kilometers of land. Despite the fact that Sudan gained its independence as one country, there has been some serious ongoing conflicts within the country, particularly between the northern part of the country and the southern part. The situation escalated in the 80s, which led to a second Sudanese civil war between 1983 to 2005. Fast forward 6 years later, that's 2011, Sudan splits to form the Republic of Sudan and the Republic of South Sudan. After the secession, both countries fell down the radar and became the poorest countries not only in Africa but the world. The big question is, what exactly made this country to split and form two independent countries? Now, the origin of the conflict between Sudan and South Sudan dates as far back as the 1800s when the Ottoman ruler of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, invaded and conquered northern Sudan. During his rule, the Egyptian authorities made significant improvements to the Sudanese economy and infrastructure, mainly in the north, especially with regards to irrigation and cotton production. At that time, the southern part of Sudan felt ignored. Fast forward to 1899. Britain joined Egypt to rule over Sudan and the situation between the north and south aggravated. Before Britain eventually entered into condominium with Egypt, they had already extended their rule from Kenya into the southern part of Sudan, where they taught the South Sudanese English and made them practice the Christian religion. Since Egypt had control over the north part of Sudan, the northerners spoke Arabic and practiced the Muslim religion. Until 1956, the British government, in collaboration with the Egyptian government, under a condominium governing arrangement, administered southern Sudan and northern Sudan as separate regions under international sovereignty. Northern Sudan was given preferential treatment due to its strategic location and the presence of the River Nile, while the south was left neglected. In 1925, Britain created the Sudan Defense Force to assist the police in the event of civil unrest and to maintain the borders of British-administered Sudan. During this period, the Southerners did not want Northerners to hold positions of power in the south, and trade between the north and south was greatly discouraged. Due to this, Northerners who believed were more superior started pressurizing Britain to unify the two governments. Britain eventually succumbed to the pressure and merged the two areas into a single administrative region. This act was taken without consultation with minority southern leaders, who feared being absorbed by the political power of the larger north under the British colonial rule. Additionally, the British government exhibited favoritism by supporting multiple northern cultural components that further deepened the societal divide between the two regions. When this happened, Arabic was made the working language in the south and northerners started holding positions of power in the south and southerners were given no chances in the north. Though Britain and Egypt went into condominium to rule over Sudan together, Britain was practically the sole ruler of Sudan since Egypt had several issues going on with its borders, which eventually led to the Egyptian Revolution. Now, the Egyptian Revolution began on the 23rd of July 1952 by the Free Officers Movement, a group of army officers led by Mohammed Naguib and Gamal Abdel Nasser. The revolution was initially aimed at overthrowing King Farouk, who was ruler of Egypt at the time. However, the movement had more political ambitions and soon moved to abolish the constitutional monarchy and aristocracy of Egypt and Sudan, establish a republic and the British occupation of the country, and secure the independence of Sudan. Before Sudan was eventually granted independence, the First Sudanese War had already begun. The war started when members of the British-administered Sudan Defense Forces, particularly those who were from the southern part, met in all towns in the now South Sudan on August 18, 1955 to conspire and overthrow the current regime, which was dominated by northerners. The conspirators were however suppressed with the help of Britain. Survivors of the coup fled the towns and began an uncoordinated insurgency in rural areas. Poorly armed and unorganized, they were little threats to the outgoing colonial power or the newly formed Sudanese government made of mostly northerners. The thing is, prior to the First Sudanese Civil War, both the northerner and southerners had different perspectives as to why the war started in the first place. The northerners attributed such hostilities to be the remnant of the South's colonial grievances against the British, while others viewed it to be the Southern's insurgents' attempts in challenging their ruling government. Therefore, the traditional northern elites did not acknowledge the fact that the war could have started due to their bad leadership. Contrarily, the southerners viewed the emergence of the civil war to be an inevitability. Following the emancipation of the region of Sudan, the southern elites were powerless within the realms of politics and established government. the southern politicians were incapable of addressing the injustice against their populace because of the minimal influence and support they had with the government in Khartoum, coupled with the fact that Islam and Arabic was being imposed on them. Therefore, in addition to their limited representation in politics, the coercion by the northern government and the cultural restriction in achieving progress were critical factors towards the onslaught of the war. After Sudan got its independence on the 1st of January 1956, ethnic and domestic tension against southern Sudan further escalated. The northern government superseded the jurisdiction of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development by committing discriminatory violence against the southern minorities under the guise of internal turmoil of democratic growth. The insurgents gradually developed into secessionist movement, which led to the creation of Anyanya guerrilla army composed of the 1955 Sudanese Defense Force conspirators and southern students. Starting from Equatoria, a region in South Sudan, between 1963 and 1969, Anyanya, which means snake venom in the Mali language, spread throughout the other two southern provinces, Upper Nile and Bahr al-Ghazal, and provided heavy pressure on the northern army's ability to properly maneuver. However, the separatist movement was crippled by internal ethnic divisions between the Nilotic and Equatorian groups, which were both very prominent ethnic groups in South Sudan. Despite the fact that the Anyanya became weak due to ethnic division, the government was unable to take advantage of their weakness due to how unstable the government had become. Between 1964 to the end of the First Sudanese Civil War in 1972, there were several protests and coups d'etat, and some of these protests were managed by people out of Sudan. In 1972, German national Rolf Steiner, who had been advising the Anyanya rebels, was captured in Kampala, Uganda, and deported to Khartoum, where he was put on trial for his anti-governmental activities. He was originally sentenced to death, but was given 3 years imprisonment due to pressure from West Germany. The southern politicians, on the other hand, attempted to gain more political control and temporarily established multiple provisional governments in the south. Not all their attempts were futile. After the establishment of the Sudanese government, the southern part of Sudan was first led by Agre Jaden before he left the movement in 1969 due to internal political disputes. In the same year, Gordon Muatat Mayen was elected unanimously as the new leader of the south. During the leadership of Gordon Mayen, southern Sudan changed its name to the Nile Republic and resumed warfare against the central government in Khartoum. Unfortunately, since Gordon was from the Dinka ethnic group, some former leaders of Jaden's troops did not want to be ruled by a Dinka leader, so they instead fought against the Anyanya in 1971. Jordan's former army, Lieutenant Joseph Lagu, formed a successful coup against Gordon Muatat with the help from Israel. By so doing, Joseph Lagu united all the troops of guerrilla fighters who attacked Jaffa Nimeri's government. About 500,000 people lost their lives during this war, and it all came to an end in March 1972 with the signing of the Addis Ababa Agreement between the government in Khartoum and southern rebels. This peace agreement was mediated both by the World Council of Churches and the All-African Conference of Churches. In Addis Ababa in 1972, Abdel Alier led the delegation representing the government of Sudan, while Esboni Mondiri led the delegation of the Southern Sudan Liberation Movement (SSLM). The negotiations were moderated by Bourges Carr, who was then the Secretary General of the All-African Conference of Churches. The Addis Ababa Agreement establishment of the South Sudan Autonomous Region gave a certain degree of autonomy to the region. It meant that South Sudan would no longer be divided into the three separate regions, Equatoria, Bahr al-Ghazal, and Upper Nile. The region would run itself through a separate legislative and executive body, and soldiers of the Anyanya would be integrated into the Sudanese army and police force. Every decision during the Addis Ababa Agreement was included in the Sudanese constitution. After the Addis Ababa Agreement, peace returned to Sudan and everything seemed okay till 1983, when the country plunged again into a second civil war. Now, two reasons caused the war: the discovery of oil and the Jaffa Nimeri's decision. In 1983, President Jaffa Nimeri declared all of Sudan an Islamic state under Sharia's law, including the non-Islamic southern region. The Southern Sudan Autonomous Region was abolished on 5th June 1983, putting an end to the Addis Ababa Agreement. The first violations occurred when President Jaffa Nimeri attempted to take control of oil fields straddling the north-south border. Oil had been discovered in Bentiu in 1978, in southern Kordofan and Upper Blue Nile in 1979, the Unity oil fields in 1980 and other oil fields in 1981, and in Henglik in 1982. Access to the oil fields meant significant economic benefits to whoever controlled them. Islamic fundamentalists in the north had been discontented with the Addis Ababa Agreement, which gave relative autonomy to the non-Islamic majority Southern Sudan Autonomous Region. The fundamentalists continued to grow in power, and in 1983 President Nimeri declared all Sudan an Islamic state, terminating the Southern Sudan Autonomous Region. This decision reignited the animosity with the southern communities, which led to the creation of the Sudan's People Liberation Movement in 1983. It was founded in 1983 as a rebel group to re-establish an autonomous southern Sudan by fighting against the central government. While based in southern Sudan, it identified itself as a movement for all oppressed Sudanese citizens and was led by John Garang. Initially, the SPLA campaigned for a united Sudan, criticizing the central government for policies that were leading to a national disintegration. During the war, a lot of President Jaffar's close collaborators started resenting some of his decisions and wanted his out. One of those collaborators was General Abdul Rahman Suwa ad-Dahab. On 6 April 1985, senior military officers led by General Abdul Rahman Suwa ad-Dahab mounted a coup against President Jaffar. After the coup, Jaffar was ousted and he fled to Egypt to seek refuge. A 15-member transitional military council was formed, chaired by General Suwa ad-Dahab in 1985. In consultation with an informal conference of political parties, unions and professional organizations known as a gathering, the military council appointed an interim civilian cabinet headed by Prime Minister Dr. Al-Jazuli Dafala. Following elections in 1986, General Dahab surrendered power to the government of Head of State Ahmed Al-Migani and Prime Minister Sadiq Ahmadi. In May 1986, the newly established Sadiq Ahmadi government coalition began peace negotiations with the Sudanese People Liberation Army, led by Colonel John Garang. In that year, the SPLA and a number of Sudanese political parties met in Ethiopia and agreed to the Coca Dam Declaration, which called for abolishing Islamic Sharia law and convening a constitutional conference. In 1988, the SPLA and the DUP agreed on a peace plan calling for the abolition of military pacts with Egypt and Libya, freezing off Sharia law, an end to the state of emergency, and a ceasefire. However, during this period, the Second Civil War was intensified, and the national economy continued to deteriorate. When prices of basic goods were increased in 1988, riots ensued, and the price increases were cancelled. When Prime Minister Sadiq Ahmadi refused to approve a peace plan reached by the Democratic Unionist Party (DUP) and the Sudan People's Liberation Army (SPLA) in November 1988, the DUP left the government in February 1989. The army presented Prime Minister Sadiq Ahmadi with an ultimatum: he could move toward peace or be removed. He chose to form a new government with the DUP and approve the SPLA/DUP peace plan. A constitutional conference was tentatively planned for September 1989. However, Prime Minister Sadiq Ahmadi was ousted before that date because on June 30, 1989, several military officers under the Colonel Omar Hassan al-Bashi, with National Islamic Front instigation and support, replaced the Sadiq Ahmadi government with the Revolutionary Command Council for National Salvation (RCC), assisted by a civilian cabinet. As General al-Bashi, he became President, Chief of State, Prime Minister and Chief of the Armed Forces. Al-Bashi's RCC military government banned trade unions, political parties and other non-religious institutions. About 78,000 members of the army, police and civil administration were purged in order to reshape the government. In March 1991, under al-Bashi's regime, a new penal code, the Criminal Act of 1991, was passed, which instituted harsh punishments nationwide, including amputation and stoning. Although the southern states were officially exempt from these Islamic prohibitions and penalties, the 1991 Act provided a possible future application of Islamic Sharia law in the south. In 1993, the government transferred most non-Muslim judges from the south to the north, replacing them with Muslim judges in the south. The introduction of public order police to enforce Sharia law resulted in the arrest and treatment under Sharia's penalties of Southerners and other non-Muslims living in the north. On 16th of October 1993, al-Bashi's powers increased when he appointed himself president of the country, after which he disbanded the Revolutionary Command Council of National Salvation (RCC) and all other rival political parties. The executive and legislative powers of the council were later given to al-Bashi completely. In the early 1990s, al-Bashi's administration gave the green light to float a new currency called Sudanese dinar to replace the battered old Sudanese pound that had lost 90% of its worth during the turbulent 1980s. The currency was later changed back to pounds, but at a much higher rate. He was later elected president with a 5-year term in the 1996 national elections, where he was the only candidate by law to run for election. During this period, the Second Sudanese War reached climax, and in 1997, the Khartoum Peace Agreement was signed. Now, this agreement had several signatories and was aimed at bringing a permanent end of the conflicts between Southerners and al-Bashi's government. The militia groups and their leaders that were signatories to this agreement were the South Sudan Independence Movement, SIM, under the leadership of Riek Machar Teni, the Union of Sudan African Parties led by Samuel Arubo, the Sudan's People Liberations Movement, SPLM, led by Kerubino Kwayin Bo, the Equatorial Defense Force led by Theophilus Ochang Loti, and the South Sudan Independence Group led by Kawak Makwei. Though the agreement was considered to be hollow, it however had some good resolution. Firstly, there was freedom of religion, movement, and a federal structure with a formula for revenue sharing was established. The agreement defined a 4-year interim period to recover from the civil war in the southern states, with a coordinating council of the southern states to oversee the transition. Riek Machar was made president of the Southern States Coordinating Council. He was also made commander-in-chief of the South Sudan Defense Force (SSDF), which included most of the ex-rebels who had signed the Khartoum Agreement. It was also agreed that a referendum on secession by Southern Sudan would be held before the end of the interim period, with international observers. After the Khartoum Peace Agreement, the war intensified due to the dictatorial leadership of Omar al-Bashir and the failure to completely implement the decisions of the agreement. Between 1997 and 2005, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed. More than 5,000 children lost their lives in the war. Peace talks between the southern rebels and the government made substantial progress in 2003 and early 2004, although conflicts in parts of the south continued. A comprehensive peace agreement was signed on 9th January 2005 in Nairobi. The terms of the peace treaty were thus: the south had autonomy for 6 years, followed by a referendum on independence, the Southern Sudanese Independence Referendum 2011. Oil revenues were divided equally between the government and SPLA during the 6-year autonomy period. Jobs were split according to various ratios: central administration 70-30, Abbey Blue Nile State Nuba Mountains 55-45, both in favor of the government. Islamic Sharia law was applied in the north, while terms of use of the Sharia in the south were decided by the elected assembly. 2 years after the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the Sudan People Liberation Movement withdrew from the central government, accusing the central government of violations of the terms of the CPA. In particular, the SPLM states that the Khartoum-based government, which is dominated by the National Congress Party, had failed to withdraw over 15,000 troops from southern oilfields and failed to implement the protocol on Abbey. This only further aggravated the conflicts between the SPLM and the central government. In December 2007, the SPLM announced that it was rejoining the government following an agreement. The agreement stated that the seat of government will rotate between Juba, which is present-day the capital of South Sudan, and Khartoum every 3 months, though it appears that this will be largely symbolic, as well as funding for a census and a timetable for the withdrawal of troops across the border. With great pressure from the SPLM, Northern Sudanese troops finally left Southern Sudan on 8th January 2008. Despite all efforts to unite both regions in the country, the people of South Sudan were bent on seceding from Northern Sudan. Just as stipulated in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, a referendum took place in Southern Sudan from 9th to 15th January 2011 on whether the region should remain a part of Sudan or become independent. On 7th February 2011, the Referendum Commission published the final results, with a landslide majority of 98.83% voting in favor of independence, while just 1% voted against. Both regions eventually parted ways on the 9th of July 2011 when South Sudan was granted independence and became the newest country in the world, with Salva Kiir as its very first president, while Omar al-Bashir remained as the president of the Republic of Sudan. The northern region of Sudan became the Republic of Sudan, while the southern region became the Republic of South Sudan. In summary, religious differences between the north and the south, discrimination and marginalization were the main factors that led to the eventual separation of Sudan. Since gaining independence from Sudan, the intertribal conflicts that started in the 80s in the south continues to destabilize the country as of 2020. South Sudan is the poorest, most corrupt and overall worst country in Africa. Dear Displorers, we would like to know, do you think South Sudan made the right decision to leave, or you think the country would have looked for ways to resolve their problems and stick together? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, do well to give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe and share with your friends.